Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, August 19th. We start tonight's newscast in Nunavut. The territory has declared a state of emergency in Iqaluit to ensure the city can begin replenishing its water reservoir. It will remain in effect for 2 weeks. The city declared its own state of emergency last week. A lack of rain has left the Apex River, Iqaluit's secondary water resupply source, at a 40-year low. The Supreme Court of Canada will soon have its first Indigenous justice. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has appointed Michelle O'Bonsawin of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to the bench. She has spent 5 years in that post, has taught law at the University of Ottawa, and served as the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group's General Counsel for 8 years. Well, starting today, individuals and businesses are no longer able to import restricted handguns into Canada, with limited exceptions. The temporary ban will last until a permanent freeze is passed in Parliament and comes into force. It's part of a federal effort to reduce firearm-related violence. The government says freezing the number of handguns in Canada will make people safer. It notes they were the most serious weapon present in most firearm-related violent crimes between 2009 and 2020. All right, well, meanwhile, Health Canada is authorizing a booster dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for children between the ages of 5 and 11 with underlying health conditions. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization is recommending children get the shot at least 6 months after their second dose. Only 42% of Canadian kids between the ages of 5 and 11 have had 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. This is the lowest uptake of all age groups. The vaccine rate in older demographics is higher than 83%. Nova Scotia wants Ottawa to grant the province an exemption from the federal carbon tax. It is saying its efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions already exceed federal targets. Premier Tim Houston says the province's plan is better than a carbon tax and that it doesn't financially punish Nova Scotians. He's hopeful Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault will consider the plan with an open mind. All right, taking a look at retail sales now, which increased 1.1% to $63.1 billion in June. Statistics Canada reports the increase came thanks to higher sales of gasoline at stations and motor vehicle and parts dealers. But its preliminary estimate indicates retail sales fell 2% in July. However, the federal agency is cautioning that figure will be revised. Meantime, retail experts say despite surging prices due to inflation, families are expected to prioritize back-to-school spending this year. The Retail Council of Canada says Canadians are expected to return to in-store shopping to stock up on fashion and school supplies. However, most will be on the hunt for a bargain. Turning to a court in Shanghai, which has sentenced a Chinese-born Canadian tycoon to 13 years in prison, and it fined him more than $8 billion. Xiao Jianhua disappeared from Hong Kong in 2017. He was convicted last month of misusing billions of dollars of deposits from banks and insurers controlled by his Tomorrow Group and offering bribes to officials. At the time of his disappearance, Mr. Xiao was worth nearly $6 billion. Now, this made him China's 32nd wealthiest person. CTV News continues to deal with the fallout from dropping its national news anchor. Its parent company, Bell Media, says its dismissal of chief anchor Lisa Laflamme may have left viewers with the wrong impression that her 35-year career wasn't valued. It now says it regrets the way it handled Ms. Laflamme's departure and that it will launch an internal workplace review. Ms. Laflamme's dismissal raised questions about whether sexism and ageism played a role, and Bell Media says it takes allegations of discrimination very seriously. A 100-year-old veteran from the raid on Dieppe, France, was given a medal from the city's mayor today. This was during a ceremony to mark the 80th anniversary of the Second World War raid. More than 900 of the 5,000 Canadian soldiers who came ashore lost their lives trying to breach the occupied town. Gordon Fennell, who was just 20 at the time, is one of the very few remaining survivors of Operation Jubilee, which was one of the best-known and deadliest events of the entire war for Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a statement to honor the Canadians who lost their lives. He said the country pays tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice at Dieppe. Stay with us. After the break, we'll be taking a look at international reaction to Canada's euthanasia laws. We'll be speaking with Mr. Tristin Hopper, a columnist and reporter with the National Post, on his research on this issue. So stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Canada's euthanasia laws are being brought into question by experts and advocates following multiple cases of assisted death being offered to patients in lieu of treatment. An Associated Press investigation into Canada's euthanasia rules cited concerns from human rights advocates around a lack of proper safeguards around such laws. It cited a 2019 case in which a Canadian man with a history of depression and other non-life-threatening issues was euthanized, despite concerns from family members and a nurse practitioner. 61-year-old Alan Nichols submitted a request for assisted death under one health reason: hearing loss, according to the report. However, such cases aren't unique in Canada, which is looking into further expanding access to medical assistance in dying, or MAID. National Post columnist Tristin Hopper today released a report on the issue and has been following the backlash against what's being called the most permissive euthanasia laws in the world. In fact, Mr. Hopper joins us now. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the current regulations around medically assisted death in Canada. Why are they being called the most permissive in the world? How do they compare to other countries with similar laws?
So when this was first brought in 2016, it was only for people with terminal illnesses. So if you had, you were in pain and you were set to die in, the next few months, reasonably foreseeable was the word. And then that was struck down by a court decision. And then that resulted in the government saying, okay, now it's anybody who just has, some level of suffering. And then starting in March, we'll have MAID, so medical assistance in dying, for anybody whose only underlying condition is a mental illness. So this is sort of beyond what makes it more permissive than a place like, say, Belgium or the Netherlands, is that sort of psychiatric angle that you can have euthanasia for basically just a mental health condition, and also who's prescribing it. So we allow it, just a nurse practitioner can sort of greenlight the process. And I think there's more stringent safeguards in not a lot of countries actually have assisted death anywhere, but the other ones who do generally have more safeguards in Canada.
And the major concern around all of this from the UN, disability rights advocates, even psychiatric professionals, is that MAID might be offered to patients rather than required treatment. So just how prominent of an issue is this in Canada already?
So in the last year, we had about 10,000 MAID deaths in Canada, which was a 30% rise over the year before. So there's no reason to believe that most of those aren't who you would want to be taking MAID. These are people who just, they want to check out early. They've got some chronic condition, they want to alleviate the last 2 months of suffering, which is the whole point. But what we're seeing every few days, almost at this point, is a case in which someone was sort of looking over their treatment options, didn't have a terminal illness, and then a healthcare practitioner said, hey, have you considered medical assistance in dying? So the most recent case, this was actually out of Global News. They spoke to the family of a Canadian Armed Forces veteran suffering from PTSD and traumatic brain injury, who was was starting to sort of get better, was on a recovery process, and then approached Veterans Affairs Canada and said, well, what services do you have for someone like me? And then in the process of that consultation, someone mentioned, hey, have you considered, basically lethal injection? There's been enough of these cases that it's apparently happening much more often than anybody would have liked, in which you have people who are otherwise quite healthy seeking treatment within the healthcare system and are being offered, maybe not exclusively, but are saying, hey, have you considered assisted death? And it's particularly troubling when, like someone with PTSD, you're talking about patients who already have suicidal ideation, and the healthcare system is saying, have you considered suicide?
Now, this is even before MAID is going to be expanding to include mental illness in March 2023. So what kind of changes are human rights advocates calling for in terms of safeguards and regulations around this law? Just about 45 seconds left here.
Uh, yeah, it's sort of hard. When this was first brought in a few years ago, there were sources from Belgium and the Netherlands saying, like, once you sort of open this Pandora's box, there's only so far you can go with the safeguards. But I think most Canadians would say we should probably have a system in which this is never offered as sort of a basket of treatment options. And this is, it's much harder to get approved than just one nurse practitioner saying it's okay for someone with clear mental health challenges.
Lots to keep our eyes on as the situation develops. Mr. Hopper, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
After the break, a look at the latest moves and developments in the crypto space. We'll have Forum Daily's weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here, who's going to unpack the ups and downs of a new sector that is constantly evolving. And after that, of course, we'll have more news and headlines from around the world, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Forum Daily's weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update with Catherine Murray is up next. Catherine is the host of The Buck Stops Here, and she joins us now. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I am Catherine Murray. Well, crypto is selling off today. Bitcoin's down by about 8%, and Dogecoin and Cardano are down by about 14 and 15% respectively. The total market cap, though, for cryptocurrencies still stands at about $1 trillion. But the theme and the tone right here is a broader market sell-off, really following a very hot inflation number out of Europe. Germany specifically saw PPI, so an inflation reading, surge 37% year over year. That's the highest number they've seen in 70 years. And recall, we also had UK's inflation reading, the highest that we've seen in 40 years. So taken together, this is causing investors to be a little bit more concerned that the U.S. Federal Reserve, that Fed Chair Jerome Powell, when he meets at the Jackson Hole conference or meeting, will be a little bit more hawkish in his tone as it relates to inflation, and therefore also potentially continuing on the path of raising rates. And recall that higher rates puts pressure on valuation. So I think that you're seeing some investors just sell now and ask questions later. In other words, they want to make sure they've got the liquidity and they don't want to see additional losses. Now, having said that, crypto has certainly gotten caught up in the broader equity and asset class sell-offs in general, and also on the upswings as well. In terms of broader crypto news, though, Stevie Cohen, who is a famous hedge fund billionaire, SAC Capital was his original firm, and now it is 0.72. He, according to some sources, is setting up a crypto-only asset firm in the early stages, we understand, but it could be part or a segment of his multi-strategy hedge fund, which I said is called 0.72 Asset Management. In terms of other news, big money managers continue to move into the space. Charles Schwab, which is, of course, a U.S. broker and investment group, launched an ETF. And the goal here is to give exposure, crypto exposure to investors without actually owning or buying the coin. So again, another large asset manager moving into the space. Interestingly as well, when we think about the use cases for cryptocurrencies, the Ukrainian government purchased weapons using $60 million that it raised via crypto donations. We've reported on that going back a number of months ago. But interestingly here, they posted Ethereum and Bitcoin addresses to which these crypto donations could be made. And once they were made, they were then converted into US dollars by the exchange FTX, which we've talked a lot about, and then sent to the National Bank of Ukraine. So again, we here in North America might not always see the use cases, but around the world, you're hearing more and more of these really interesting stories. And also recall, we heard from the IMF as well as Larry Fink that the war in Ukraine could likely accelerate digital currencies. And that is, in fact, what we are starting to see. Away from that, I would just point out as well that Google has invested about $1.5 billion in private crypto capital raise. That's according to block data. And I'd also point out from a regulatory perspective that In Canada, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, or OFSI as it is known, is going to be requiring banks to notify the regulator if they have more than 1% of tier one capital exposed to cryptocurrencies. So again, just making sure that the Canadian banks also, of course, have the Canadian or fiat currencies versus just cryptocurrencies. And of course, that's the case as we know it now. But we also know that other countries are allowing crypto to become a fiat. So perhaps getting a little bit ahead of that. And lastly, as we know, it has been a very volatile time for cryptocurrencies, and it's been called the crypto winter. I would just also point out that as much as we see some price stability as of late, not today, but as of late, the three largest publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies had or showed in their second quarter more than $1 billion in impairment charges. So, certainly seeing the impact across the board, both to the upside as well as to the downside. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. For more analysis and news on the markets, be sure to tune in to Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. It airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. All right, when we come back, we'll take a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world. So stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back. Ukraine and Russia are continuing to accuse each other of shelling Europe's largest nuclear power plant. This is raising international fears of a catastrophe on the continent. The Secretary of Russia's Security Council is also accusing Washington of encouraging Ukrainian attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine, which has been controlled by Russian forces for months. Ukraine has accused Russia of storing troops and weapons there and of using its grounds to launch strikes against Ukrainian-controlled territory. Following a visit to Ukraine yesterday, Turkey's president said Ukraine's president asked him to ensure that Russia removes weapons stored at the plant. And he is promising to raise the issue with Russian President Vladimir Putin. All right, well, meanwhile, in Spain, 35 water bombers are now attacking an out-of-control wildfire in the eastern province of Valencia. The fire has burnt more than 19,000 hectares in 5 days. 4 people are in hospital with severe burns. This was after several passengers tried to jump off a train that had stopped and tried to reverse after driving into the spreading wildfire. The European Commission's Copernicus Earth Observation Program says Spain has been hit harder than any other European country this year. Climate troubles are also dogging China, where ships are creeping down the middle of the depleting Yangtze River. This comes after China's driest summer in 6 decades left one of the mightiest rivers barely half its normal width. The drought has set off a scramble to contain damage in a weak economy during a politically sensitive year. Factories in the southwest were ordered to shut down. This was after reservoirs that supply hydropower fell to half their typical levels, while demand for air conditioning had surged. Moving to the UK, where public health leaders are calling on the government to urgently tackle soaring energy prices. In a letter sent to the government on Friday, they warn that the steep rise in household bills will lead to more sickness and increase the number of annual deaths linked with cold homes. The National Health Service Confederation said rising costs mean many will have to choose between skipping meals to heat their homes or living in cold and damp conditions this winter. The average UK household fuel bill has risen more than 50% so far this year. In fact, further increases are expected. Meanwhile, Calgary-based Enbridge is marking another victory in its fight with the state of Michigan. This is over a controversial cross-border oil and gas pipeline. A Michigan judge has again ruled in favor of the company, saying Governor Gretchen Whitmer's bid to shut down Line 5 should be heard in federal court. Enbridge says shutting down the pipeline would defy an international treaty with Canada that has been in place since 1977. The governor says the state has the right to shut down Line 5. She says it is an ecological threat. Tech giant Apple points to serious security vulnerabilities for iPhones, iPads, and Macs. It says they could allow hackers to take full control of these devices. The tech company says it's aware of a report that this issue may have been exploited. Security experts are advising users to update affected devices. This includes the iPhone 6s and later models, all iPad Pro models, and the iPad Air 2 and Mac computers running macOS Monterey. They say activists, journalists, and others who are in the public eye may be particularly targeted. Finland's Prime Minister Sanna Marin has taken a drug test for her own legal protection. Now, this was after a video was leaked of her at her private party, dancing and lip-syncing. Now, she's defending her actions, saying she drank alcohol at a party with friends but did not do any drugs. Results are expected in about a week. A video posted Thursday shows 6 people dancing and lip-syncing, including the Prime Minister. Well, the summer has been a breakthrough for streaming. In July, for the first month ever, the time viewers spent watching services like Netflix and Hulu outpaced the viewership of broadcast and cable television networks. The stats say viewers spent 35% of their time with streamers, 34% on cable networks, and 22% watching broadcast television last month. July is traditionally an unusual month, with broadcast TV essentially on vacation. However, the numbers make it clear how rapidly the business is changing. A K-pop boy band has surpassed a Canadian superstar. BTS now has 70 million YouTube subscribers, just past Justin Bieber's 69.7 million followers. Now that puts the two musical acts at 2 and 3, respectively, for YouTube follower counts. Topping the list is K-pop girl group Blackpink with 76.5 million subscribers. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.